I have the pleasure to be here today with Laurie Dennett and Colleen O'Toole. Colleen is going to interview Laurie regarding a chapter from her book, Waybread. And Colleen is one of the coordinators of the Hamilton CCoP chapter, and Laurie Dennett probably needs no introduction to anybody who's watching. So I'm going to step right back and enjoy the conversation. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, Laurie, and thank you for making the time to be with us today. Maybe not the last time I saw you, but I did see you in Laguna. We visited and walked the labyrinth and had some of your beautiful hospitality. So that's a really warm memory for me.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you. It's a warm one for me too. It was lovely visit.
It felt like a beautiful pause in the middle of our pilgrimage. So thank you. So I'll just start by referencing the publisher's note in your book, Waybread, in which Rebecca Scott described you as a pilgrim, historian, writer, speaker, and activist, a doer, motivator, and leader, which is lovely and all true. And she called your book a garden of wisdom and a tale of those who strive to keep the Camino simple. So I love that description of you, and I think it's all accurate, and I'm not going to give you time to say no to any of that.
I would just say Rebecca is unfailingly generous in what she says and what she does. So yeah, that was very nice of her to write that. It's good.
Yeah. So we're going to talk today about chapter 4 in Waybread, Gifts and Reflections. There's a sentiment crafted, I would say crafted, into one or two lines toward the end that stopped me in my tracks because I feel it. I felt it in my bones when I read it. I remember the moment that happened for me. And that's specifically why I selected this chapter to talk to you about as part of the Canadian Company of Pilgrims series on your book. But the chapter is full of beautiful things. But that's what really grabbed me. So if it's okay with you, we'll just wind our way toward that. So maybe to start, I wonder if you would set the context for people who haven't got the chance to read the whole book yet or haven't read this chapter, if you'd like to set the context for this particular chapter 4.
Yes, by all means. Gifts and Reflections was a talk that I gave on our annual general meeting date in 2003, January 2003. I was stepping down as chair of the Confraternity after 8 years, and after a number of years as well as a vice chair. I'd been on the committee in one form or another for 17 of the Confraternity's 20 years at that point. So I felt I had a lot to say about the Confraternity, and I distilled my feelings into this last talk. It took me quite a time to get down to writing it. All the work was really interior, and once I sat down to write it, I almost couldn't stop. It just poured out. And it was one of those experiences that I was so moved, I was almost afraid to breathe in case any of it went away. And then I reworked parts of it quite a bit too. But then, you stand up and you give something like this, looking out at an audience, because I'd read it so many times by then, I didn't really need to read it. And I looked out and I was astonished and delighted to see at the point where I, at the beginning, invite people to engage in this imaginative exercise and close their eyes and imagine their favorite stretch of the Camino. There were people in the front several rows who closed their eyes. I couldn't believe it. They actually did what I'd suggested that I do, and I hadn't really expected that. I hadn't really expected that they would be so taken up with what they were listening to, that they would actually do that. So at that point, I actually did find that quite moving, and I started to read the piece and just carried on and read it the rest of the way. I realized I was on fairly treacherous ground if I started catching people's eye. So that was really the context. It was a lovely occasion. We had three people from our sister association in the Bierzo, with whom we've collaborated so closely on Refugio Gautelmo, actually there at that AGM, very much at my insistence. And they didn't understand much of it, but I'd translated this piece into Spanish for them. So they had a copy of it on their knees. They were following it in Spanish. So that's the context. It was a lovely occasion actually for me. So
and I love that that image of you looking down and seeing people closing their eyes and being surprised by it. And
oh, it was.
Yeah, but I think even that is a gift, to give people a moment to tell them to imagine themselves on their favorite part of the Camino. It's like, oh, all the time. Like, wouldn't we love to do that? So,
yes.
So I love the and just as you said, I'm just going to read this a little bit because so I don't lose my track. But I love the themes in the chapter, all the gifts that we give and receive, and it to me many times it was reading like poetry. So we're socialized to and be trained actually to try to control life. I think as much as we can, like we value control as a society. And being on the Camino with the opportunity to be free, it takes some time to let go of that need to control things, my experience anyway. And the group of 5 pilgrims and their care for each other, it just painted such a beautiful picture. It was so tender. And you illustrate, I think, how this idea of not controlling, not knowing, and allowing uncertainty leads to gifts. Which probably ties into the importance of keeping the Camino as simple as possible. But I don't want to race past that picture that you painted of the 5 pilgrims, because for me, it seems like, not that there's one essence, but it feels like an essence of the Camino, that beautiful thing that you described. So I wonder if you can elaborate on what that is. I think in the chapter you may have called it fraternal charity. If you can elaborate on that, the essence of it, is it the same as love?
Yes. Where to begin on that? I remember those 5 with tremendous affection, as you can imagine. I got to know each of them and I got to know them collectively. And they were quite astonished at what they had received by simply bumping into one another and falling in together as a group, having each of them started out alone and one or two of them really being at sea. I mean, the poor Japanese chap who had a little bit of English but no Spanish and all this clobber on his back. His mother had insisted that he carry all this stuff because he was going to heaven knows where and he might not get decent food, you see. So there he was, way behind everybody else. And the chap from the Cameroons who had emigrated to France, great tall giant of a guy who was just so charming, and caring and really a gentle giant. He just took it upon himself to make sure that Takahide did not fall behind or lose sight of the others. He could go at his own pace, but the others didn't outpace him and just leave him. He was very much a part of that group. And Jean-Marc would just turn around and see where he was and wait for him. And sometimes when he saw him ease that great burden to the ground for a bit, he'd just walk back and pick it up and carry it on and give his friend a rest. Now, fraternal charity, yes, of course it's love. It's love, but with no expectation of return. It's with no possessiveness. You do for someone what you hope someone would do for you, but you don't expect that. You just do it because goodness burgeons up in you and you are so moved. I don't know how else to describe that. How can you see someone in difficulty and not respond in that way? Whether it's somebody trying to cross the road with two little kids, you know, in a busy city and nobody slowing down, you know, you get out there and help them. But I try to put it, you know, in a more general way. Fraternal charity is really the second great maxim of the Gospels. You know, that we are to love God, and those that are not believers just substitute the word life, you know, and you'll have far less problem with it. Love life with all your heart, and your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's what I mean. You know, you find on the Camino, it doesn't matter whether your neighbor is an unemployed person or a high court judge. The person you're walking with is your neighbor, the same as when you get home, your neighbor is your neighbor. And that's how you are called to relate to them. Is that enough on that point, do you think?
No,
Does it make sense?
it does make sense to me. And as you were describing it, I was remembering when I came back from my first Camino, and I was attempting to interact with people here in Ontario like they were pilgrims. So speaking to people, offering them things, and they got nervous. They were not used to that extent, I think, of that in the day-to-day sort of world, which is too bad. I thought of that. Do you think, and I don't know if I asked you this, do you think there's a relation in there to the importance of keeping the Camino simple? Do you think keeping the Camino simple, as you talked about, I think it was in this chapter, I guess what I'm thinking of when I say this is, do we lean on each other more when there's some hardship or some difficulty we're trying to get through? If the Camino becomes organized and, you know, it's day 4, we do these things, it takes a little bit of that uncertainty away. I'm not sure if there's a question in there, Laurie, but it's just, I'm thinking of them as supporting each other, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Yes, I would say, you know, support one another in the joyful times too. You come over the crest of a hill and see something marvelous. You know, it's cause for rejoicing for everybody, for each person individually, and what you share. That's a memory that you'll all take home with you. But keeping it simple, I mean, it is simple. It is simple. All you have to do in the course of the day is get from A to B and be open and pay attention along the way. You can't experience the small miracles that are there, and they're always there, but a lot of people walk right past them, unless you're open to them. And maybe the effort has to go into staying open to them and not letting all the clutter get in the way. And, you know, I know you and I have mentioned this, but I revert always to my disappointment when I see a pilgrim walking along plugged into some kind of a device, whether it's a music player or talking on a mobile or whatever, because, you know, they're only, or maybe they'll come back, but they don't know that. I don't know that. You know, you're out in this glorious countryside. You have the road under your feet, the sky over you, the horizon up ahead. That's all there is. That's all there is the next 10 minutes, the next hour, that day, and what you do with it at the end of it. And if that doesn't instill a lot of very contemplative making gratitude, I don't know what will. You know, I had somebody here the other day who was saying, if I sat on the bench here long enough, I'd forget about going to mass. And I said, well, absolutely. This garden is a cathedral without a roof. You know, it's a great big thank you. But you have to be awake and aware and open to perceive that. If you're just sort of plodding along, trying to keep up with people, or worried about whether you're going to get a bed, or worried about, anything else, whether that pilgrim up there likes you very much or not. You're not open to what's going on around you. I would say just keep it simple, in the sense of focus, open, and go, and just don't don't let all the junk get in the way, you know.
Attention and presence, it sounds like.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the small wonders are there, but if you aren't looking for them, you won't see them. If you're not open to them, you won't see them. I'm reminded of a university friend I had who was always going out for walks, and I would say, "Oh, where do you go?" And he said, "Oh, I don't. It doesn't matter where I go. I just go, and I'm looking for money." He said, "If I don't look for it, I won't find it." And he always came back with money. But that was what he was looking for, was a dime here, a quarter there, dollar bill over there, and he would find it. If he'd just gone walking, not looking for it, he wouldn't have found any of it. He would be lying there still, or somebody else would have found it. Anyway, it's not a very good parallel, but the attitude maybe is,
Yeah.
you're going and being entirely present in what you're doing. So looking at what's there, what's really there.
Being careful what you look for, I suppose, because you'll find.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Next September, David and I are going to volunteer as hospitaleros at the Refugio Cafalmo that you helped bring into being. And I love what you said about the creation of this place in relation to gifts. You said, I'm going to read a quote. The soul of the confraternity was forged in Rabanal, and in seeking to give, we have quite unwittingly, and I love this, brought down upon ourselves a shower of blessings of every kind. So paints a picture. This past year, I served as hospitalera for the first time in Bercianos, and as much as Tom and the CCoP prepared me to do the job, I was shocked at how transformative it was to me personally. Witnessing all the deep work people were doing, all kinds of compassion between people, spontaneous and generous help that you described with your 5 pilgrims, and something about being steeped in that spirit for 15 days. They were long days, as the hospitaleros who left us in charge as they were running out the door said, mucho trabajando. So we were very busy, but in the end I felt like I probably received more than I gave, and I was so surprised at that. And calling it a beautiful gift is probably an understatement. It's hard to describe to people what that is, but when you described it as a shower of blessings of all kind raining down on you, it did feel a bit like that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that energy, about that surprise of getting back something you weren't expecting anything. You're giving something freely.
Yes, I think part of it is what a diverse organization we were back then, just to tie it a little bit to the actual confraternity. We were a very small association then, probably very few more than 200 people actively involved there. And the range of experience, capability, training, social condition, age, state of health and vitality was so different, so diverse. And yet, each and every one of us felt that by having enacted the Camino, we had gained so much for all that effort. We'd actually come home with a rucksack full of marvels, if you like. And we were, each and every one of us, intent on giving it back for the benefit of other pilgrims. And that unifying principle really outweighed any of the differences. I mean, you had people collaborating in ways that probably in any other context they might well not have done. I think the Camino just knocks all the boundaries and the restrictions out from under people. And that same attitude, which I was just describing about being aware and fully conscious in a situation, that means, I guess, in a situation like, for instance, fundraising for Rabanal, people having to work with or choosing to work with, and then as we got on with it, exulting in working with people very different to themselves, with possibly not much in common except that aim of giving something back to the Camino. And everybody being very supportive and very positive about getting there. I remember being the first speaker to talk about Rabanal, and I did it in Spanish at the Estella conference in the summer of 1990. And I stood up and spoke about the project, which hadn't even been got off the ground yet. Really, we were just in the fundraising stage. Nobody'd even, bought a pile of bricks yet. And somebody from one of the Spanish associations, a rather proud academic, stood up and said, when I had finished, he said, well, that's all very well. It's a very utopian enterprise, and I hope you raise £1,000. The commitment was to raise 50,000, and somebody else stood up and said, sit down. What she's talking about is the spirit of the Camino. So this chap sat down, utterly, nonplussed. Anyway, he had to eat his words when a year and a bit later, Gauthelmo opened its doors. It was extraordinary. And we got there through the help of really everyone who heard about it. Everybody had a small part to play in that, but together we made something wonderful. So, yeah, and the blessings of meeting new people, getting to know people that we wouldn't otherwise have got to, feeling ourselves appreciated by others, learning new skills and abilities we didn't know we had even. You lose your fear when you invite the neighbors into dinner and then ask them to kick in a donation for the albergue, and people did all kinds of amazing things. The one I always cite is a member of ours who didn't really like heights, but she conquered her fear and did a parachute jump. And she raised in sponsorship £900 for the cause. And we all thought that was fantastic. We thought if she can do that, we can do anything, whatever we can do, small though it is, it will all help. So that was the spirit in which we went about it. And the blessings were infinite, and they're still going on. So
I was thinking they're probably still coming, right?
Well, yes. I mean, you think of the number of people whose lives have been touched in some way, not just the pilgrims, but all of us, all the hospitaleros that there have been since, all the people who were on the Premio Elias Valinha jury in 1995 when we won the first Valinha Prize, and 44 associations, and we won it not quite unanimously, but very nearly so. And they all were just amazed at that, and it inspired a lot of other good projects. So it's the ripples have just gone outwards and outwards, and they're still going. All the villagers in Rabanal, people who are now, because life has come back to that village, enabled to make a dignified living and send their kids to university and do things that they would not otherwise have been able to do. It's worked very positively for the surrounding area too, which was desperately, desperately poor before, and a very, very oriented to the pilgrimage kind of area. But people didn't have much to rejoice about around the edges, if you like. Their lives were hard, and their lives they're still fairly hard, but mainly less hard than they used to be. So it's feeling the feeling that we've given a lot but gained a lot, and we can see the tangible good that we've done. It's a fact. So, and I think all the associations feel that, you know, the ones who've set up albergues. We have the German one in La Faba and the Swiss one in Ponferrada as well. I think they all feel whatever it's taken, it comes back in, you know, in infinite sense that the Camino is the stronger for all that collaboration. So,
and the ripple effect that you talk about. When we were in Bercianos this past spring, we had pilgrims leaving that would grab our hand, and a few people actually did this and said, you know, you have to make sure these places still exist, you know, that the people are coming to do this work, that there are places that we can be welcomed in this way. And it was the imperative sort of way they were talking about this. And you could see, you know, so we, as hospitaleros, you're there 15 days, and we're seeing people come in one way and go out another way. Like you can see on the micro level the change in the person, and how important these places are.
yeah.
It's a very different way of being received, and you can see what happens to people. They used words like we felt seen, we felt heard. There was this feeling of people needing to tell their stories and have time to have their stories heard.
Mm-hmm.
And we could see it there in the morning. There was one Italian pilgrim when she was leaving, and of course that, like you described, the laughter and the hand gestures, we don't always share the same language, but she was conveying, you know, I can't repay you for this, but I will pay it forward on the way. And this generosity just keeps going and going, and you change the world this way eventually, right? With these small.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
There was a paragraph that is on page 112. I don't know if I can read something to you. Is that okay? In your
Certainly.
chapter?
Certainly.
The precious human interchanges, of which we all no doubt have our own memories, are perhaps easier to protect because we can respond to them individually by expressing our gratitude directly. We witness them individually by heartfelt going and doing likewise for someone else, somewhere else. That is how we, whose lives have been altered by our experience of the Camino, transform the world around us, person by person and moment by moment, into a reflection of it. I loved that. And that really described that feeling for me of what happens. So thinking about these donativo experiences, and my experience is limited, you know, to a few, but can you say something about the importance of being welcomed in that way? You know, like the expecting nothing in return, and what that does for a person.
Well, I think in so much of the developed world, people are received according to how they're perceived in their superficial aspect, how they're dressed, whether they're clean or not, whether they've been to the hairdresser, you know, whether their shoes are shiny or their handbag is falling apart or whatever. You know, whether the dog they're walking with has a piece of string as a leash or a proper collar. You know, there's all kinds of tacit judgments made. And I think in the albergues, especially in the donativo ones, where the stay is not so much, it's not free in that obviously there are expenses to cover, but the difference is that by simply having a donativo box there and leaving it at the discretion of the pilgrim, you know, of the pilgrim, you know, it makes people think. It makes people think about what the stay might cost for themselves or for the person who's coming along behind them, who might not even have the €5 or whatever it is that is the expected sum in a lot of places. It's something very modest. But of course, economics has its place in it. We at Gauthelmo have to balance the books at the end of the year, or curtail the plans we may have for the place until we can afford them. But there's another set of expectations going on there, and that's simply that nothing has a price tag. You know, that it's one of the few contexts that a person can find themselves in and have to accept that they're being greeted and embraced and spoken to and welcomed purely for their human qualities, purely because they are a fellow human being. And the person doing the welcoming is not, you know, being superior or playing mother or anything else. It's a genuine fraternal welcome or sisterly welcome. And, you know, the person is a joy to the person receiving them. The arrival of a pilgrim is a joyful event. And, you know, that joy shines out of hospitaleros' faces, as we all know. And a lot of pilgrims are knocked absolutely sideways by that. And and rightly so, because it does make them think. And not everything has a price tag in this world. God help us if we allow the measure of the marketplace to determine how we regard each other and how we treat each other. And the Camino is one context where all those rules just go by the board. And Donativo albergues are very special places because, you know, I've written elsewhere about this. We don't so much welcome pilgrims into our home. We welcome pilgrims into their home while they are staying there. Gauthelmo is theirs, and they are invited to simply be themselves. I mean, obviously not go shouting around the dormitory at midnight, but they can just relax and just draw in all the goodness around, all the provision for them, all the care, all the pleasant company of their fellow pilgrims, the beautiful services in the church over the way, the beautiful huerta, and go and sit there in silence and write their journals or have a cup of tea in the afternoon and swap experiences. It is a wonderful ambience, and I think it does have a very transformative effect. And so there I'll end that reminiscence. But yes, I think the piece you read is very, very apt.
And what you're describing is setting the feels like it sets the, what is the word I'm searching for and groping for here? It makes the conditions right for people to allow the gifts that they've been receiving, to do the work that they want to do for themselves. You can see, I described it someplace, my experience welcoming people or seeing them more like welcoming them, but it was like they were arriving by layers, and you could see them kind of drop down a layer, and then they arrive.
Yes, all the defenses just kind of, you know, dissolve, and those gifts flourish, and people emerge, they shine, they flower. Um, and you know, I have a whole number of these photographs in Waybread of huge communal dinners where a group of Americans or a group of Italians or a group of, you know, they find 5 or 6 from the same country and they say, let's do dinner, you know, so they'll go out and buy a great load of spaghetti and tomato sauce and salad and stuff, and they'll do dinner for everybody, you know, 40 people sitting down to a meal together. And if someone takes a photograph of that, you see it. I mean, it just shines out of the photograph. It's sheer exaltation in being in the company of, you know, a pilgrim community where all the all the differences dissolve, and the things you have in common, whether you have any language in common or not, just emerge and unite you one to another. It's very beautiful.
You can see the joy and you can see the joy in connection. It's so
Absolutely.
simple. It
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what you're eating.
Yeah.
And I have this memory when you talked about the communal meal. One of my favorite memories is a fella that was, we were in a bit of a frenzy. There were a whole bunch of people showed up at the door at the last minute, and we didn't know if we had enough food. We ran out of bread. And so we just gave the purse to some pilgrim that came in. I'm not sure I remember his name, but I remember the look on his face. He was so surprised. And when he left the next day, he actually thanked us for sending him for bread, because he felt like he belonged to a family, that he was part of something, and that was part of what he was, part of the thing that he was carrying. You never know what people are carrying, but that beautiful coming together for something like that, that's so simple. It was yeah, it's you can see the healing in it, I think.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Do you think it, maybe this is an ignorant question, but donativos and the system of this, do you think that it's in jeopardy in any way? Do you think that there's we can't assume that things will always be this way? What is my question? I guess, is there a chance one day that they won't exist, that we will?
Well, I wrote Waybread. I put Waybread together because, to be strictly honest, the pieces in it were all written beforehand, and I just read through everything I'd ever done and pulled out 12 that I thought made sense and hung together, that made the points I felt impelled to make. The sense that everything has become so commercialized and so complicated, and certain elements, on the pretext of making the Camino easier, actually kind of sideline some of the most wonderful experiences that people can have and take home with them. And if they don't experience those things, then they don't have the lessons from them. But no, what I meant to say about that is that I think in putting Waybread together, I was genuinely concerned about how the Donativo albergues were going to survive in the face of a lot of quite aggressive competition now, not all from people who've actually made their Camino and want to give something back to it, which is what the majority of the private albergues are about. There are some big albergues that now belong to hotel chains and municipalities, and they are just intent on making money from the Camino. And if they set a price for a bed, and your pilgrim who's walked all the way from Poland can't afford whatever that is, night after night after night, then those long distance pilgrims are really going to fade away. And I would hate to see that, because the pilgrimage has always been about people from the other side of the Pyrenees as well, making their way to Compostela. But I do have some very good news to report, and this is the first opportunity I have to report it. The Association of Albergues de Acogida Tradicional, which really means the Albergues de Donativo, there are 14, 16 of them in this association. They put a proposal up a few months ago to UNESCO, which adopted the Camino as something that needs to be protected some years ago, and all kinds of assaults on it have taken place. The roads being altered and that kind of thing, and to the point that UNESCO has even protested about it. But they put forward the proposal that the intangibles of the pilgrimage roads, like traditional hospitality, like the music, etc., were part also of the patrimony of humanity. and should be protected. And UNESCO has just pronounced in favor of that. So you're the first to be hearing that. And that is very good news for the albergues de donativo. I think if there are pressures upon them, they now have at least a backup. And it's called UNESCO, and it will be called upon if such pressures arise. So that's very good news indeed. I only heard about that 10 days ago. So
wow, that's a
it's
relief.
good, isn't it?
It's surprising to hear this during our interview. So
Yes, yes,
um,
yes. Well, I'll have to find some other context to or forum to say it in, but I will write something for the Confraternity bulletin about that, and maybe if I get any information, I can send that on to you, and maybe you could write something up for your website or something like that about it, because I'm sure people would love to know it, you know?
I think so, and I know people just for the really from the very authentic way that people were saying as they were leaving, the surprise of these wonderful welcomes, and that we have to protect this somehow. But
Mhm.
that's
Well, the other threat to donativos is simply that many pilgrims, and especially older ones, no longer really like sharing facilities. Everybody wants their own space, and that kind of communal effort may have to struggle anyway, purely by the nature of it and the fact that society is changing and prosperity has meant more choice for people. But I still don't think that your long distance pilgrim can afford to shell out or wants to shell out 50 euros a night in a private albergue. It just isn't the experience of the Camino. Quite apart from not being something that's affordable, it's not what the Camino is about. It's tourism, really. So
well, and it takes away that connection, which sometimes is a bit more than we want. But a lot of times, I remember one time specifically, I was having a particularly bad day, and somebody mentioned something about the snoring, and I said, it's great. I'm not alone. I'm here with all these people because I can hear them. So,
yes,
so there's a lot of times that it's not great to be in a space all by yourself. You think it's nice and tidy, but there's something lovely in all that community, lovely
mm,
and messy. But
yeah,
um,
yeah.
so I think we might be coming close to time. But I wanted to say the one thing that I talked about in the beginning. So I'll just read this. I wanted to talk about the lovely paragraphs where you talk about the importance of O Cebreiro in the
Mhm.
spiritual geography of the Camino. And I just love this idea that there's a spiritual geography of the Camino. And I think we could talk about that for an hour. But you talk about it and you say it's a truly holy place. And the idea of climbing that final mountain and realizing for perhaps the first time, see, this is where I get weepy.
Yes, I
The
can see
first
it.
time, of the significance of, as you said, the transforming insight whispering, we will go home. And
Mhm.
many readers, including myself, will remember when that happened for them, the emotions, and how nothing is quite the same after that insight. It's like there's a before and after as you approach Santiago. And I know that you phrased this quite carefully, this rephrased question you had about what happens when the walking ends. So I can read it, or you can read it, or you know what I'm talking about, I think,
Oh,
right?
if you can read it, you go ahead because
Okay.
you're doing a beautiful job.
Okay, because I know you did this quite carefully and I don't want to. So I have long thought that this insight about how we are going to assimilate the pilgrimage into the life we are going back to, or rather, since we come to understand that we must rephrase the question, how are we going to transform the life we are going back to into a fair copy of the pilgrimage? Comes like a cool breeze on the cheek when we pilgrims can finally rest after the grueling climb up to the tiny but very significant halt of O Cebreiro. So it's this,
Yes.
yeah. So this idea of it's not the end, it's the beginning. What will we do? So my little tiny question for you is, how do we go home? And what's helpful to think about when we hear that whisper to go home and not lose things? Do you want to talk
Well, I want to say one thing about why O Cebreiro is the point at which that happens. It isn't just that it's historic or all it's freighted with history and significance in the context of the pilgrimage and so on, but it is the last of the great physical obstacles. And people worry about it. People worry from the time they, cross the Pyrenees or whether they start there. They worry about Alto del Perdón, whether going up will kill them or whether coming down will kill them. They worry about the Meseta. They don't worry about La Rioja. There's enough to, get them across La Rioja very comfortably, but they start worrying about the Meseta on the other side of Burgos. Then they no sooner get past León than they start worrying about the Montes de León up ahead. They get through that and they fall into the Bierzo, and then all of a sudden it's O Cebreiro. And they crawl up to O Cebreiro, and suddenly, I mean, I've watched this happen frequently, sometimes drive up and just sit in my car and just for 5 minutes before I get out of it and just watch people coming up and standing on the road. And you can almost see it. They realize if they've made it that far, if they've made that great physical obstacle a thing of the past, then what's ahead of them is infinitely doable. And Santiago is 150 kilometers away, and it is all gentle. And if they've got to O Cebreiro, they are going to get to Santiago. All of a sudden, it dawns on them 3 days after that, they're going to be on their way back to Hamburg or somewhere. And it just rushes in upon them. How am I going to take this with me and make it the shape of my life? And I'm not sure I can improve on the way I put it in Gifts and Reflections, but I think I'm describing what you mean by the question. It's that realization that that distance, in a sense, you've already covered it. You will arrive. You will arrive unless, you get struck by a bolt of lightning, and you're not going to. So, but, it's that sense that people have when they get to Santiago, the sense that they arrived some time ago because they're doing that shuffling process, So, are we still being recorded, Tom, or have you?
You're still on. I'm really enjoying this. Lots of nods and smiles from me, and great
Okay.
memories you've sparked with me. Thank you so much. So let me just take this moment to thank both of you, Colleen, for your strong preparation and for unlocking those wonderful words from Laurie. This has just been a great conversation, and I really appreciate it from both of you. So I'm going to stop the recording unless you want to have any final words to say.
Well, I think Colleen wanted me to say something about the Benedictines in O Cebreiro. And yep. I wanted to tie that in. I said, I kind of set the historical context aside for a moment. But pilgrims also, when they reach O Cebreiro, they read that lovely plaque and they read a bit of history, and they learn that there has been a community of one kind or another established there since the middle of the 9th century, looking after pilgrims, specifically with a mission to pilgrims. And that just knocks people sideways. To think that a person like me or him or her has been thought of and prepared for in advance and cared for in that way. And I think that was one of the things that probably impressed Don Elias about O Cebreiro, which he first saw as a ruin. But nonetheless, the community was, that sense of it being a place where pilgrims had always stopped, as long as there'd been a pilgrimage to Santiago, was very strong there. So there's two things together, really. I think that's all I wanted to say.
I think that was I missed that part in some of my earlier questions. I was drawn off in other ways, but I see the link between the Benedictines and the fifth pillar, as you say, and the continuation, really. So
Well, the fifth pillar, I always conceived the fifth pillar as being the people along the way. You know, the ordinary folk who have sustained the pilgrimage simply by making it possible for pilgrims to find somewhere to sleep and somewhere to rest and something to eat and a bit of human company and a bit of encouragement to help them along the way. They've kept the Camino alive for centuries. And when, through wars, through terrible weather, through eras of extreme poverty, like the period after the Civil War, when, the whole country was just in ruins and its economy was wrecked and all of that. It was ordinary folk, just offering a kindly hand of whatever sort that kept it going. So to me, the people of the Camino are the fifth pillar, and there you have fraternal charity at work, on the ground from one end of the Camino to the other.
it's all about love. And we've
It
done
is indeed. It is indeed, but not the silly romantic kind.
No.
It's the bedrock kind, and the kind that is disinterested in the best sense, in that it is not seeking its own reward. It may receive it, but it isn't seeking it. So there we are. Maybe we should end there.
I think so. That was I don't know where else we can go from there. That was lovely. Thank you so much, Laurie. You're a
Thank
delight.
you. Thank you. That
That
was
was
a really, really lovely talk. Thanks.
Yeah, it was truly wonderful. The word that kept coming through my mind as you talked was the word comunitas, and the idea that we find that in our fellow pilgrims. We also find it in the hospitaleros and the donativo albergues and in the community that was there. And I think the effort after the Camino is to find that sense of comunitas in our own home communities with fellow pilgrims, with in service work to others, in doing something that we believe in, whether it be building trails or building community or having folk festivals. Those are all opportunities to recreate the Camino where we live. But thank you
Absolutely.
so much for the conversation.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, you take it home and live it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. See you both soon.